Microsoft has an EU problem, Microsoft doesn't have a South Korea problem, and Microsoft also doesn't have a widget problem. Happy Friday, my friends, although if I'm being completely honest, this is Thursday evening when I'm recording, so hopefully you had a wonderful week. I've got a jam-packed schedule, and as a kind of a show note reminder, next week, there will be nothing next week because I will be on vacation, enjoying myself, not doing these things, although I do enjoy this, but either way, I won't be home to record a podcast. And so we're doing this one a little early. Hopefully you had a wonderful week. It's now June, which is... I don't know what's happening to the year, my life, or anything else yet. No, I'm just kidding. It's June. Hopefully you guys had a wonderful week. I don't know, whatever. Let's get into the news. Microsoft announced, hey, dark mode for Paint. It's finally officially here. Previously, you could get Paint dark mode through some hackery things and tweaking up bits and behind the scenes stuff. But officially, Microsoft is making dark mode Paint. I don't even remember how long ago they announced this. It's been a long time available to Windows Insiders, which means it'll be coming to everybody in the near future. Windows 11 build 23471, the file Explorer gallery, which I don't usually call out all the features that come to these insider builds because they're numerous, which is a great thing. However, this one, the gallery feature in Explorer, they're really doing some overhauling to Explorer, and it just makes it a lot easier to view photos and everything else. And if you ever try to navigate a whole bunch of photos in File Explorer, it's not the best. So this gallery feature is a good, nice improvement. Following the Windows 11 RAR support, that's RAR files, WinGit will soon be able to install zip files natively, and also native PowerShell integration is also coming to that as well. And so Windows 11 side continuing here. There's actually some good widgets coming. I can't remember exactly when this was announced, but you'll soon be able to monitor the CPU, the GPU, and the RAM. Think of your, when you open like Task Manager up and you can go through it and you can kind of see all the performance and everything else about the machine. You'll be able to get those viewpoints in a widget, which actually is something I think a lot of people like myself would actually use. And so these are genuinely useful widgets. It's really creeping into the territory of Rainmeter. If you're not familiar with Rainmeter, it's probably the de facto way to add things not natively, but on your desktop without them being on your desktop, if that makes sense. But it's it's not exactly always user friendly. And so anyways, these widgets, I'm actually excited. It's fair to say I'm excited by widgets. I am excited by widgets. Speaking of Windows, by the way, Windows XP has been cracked. Well, okay, this is not really something new, but it's really that you can now run a crack in an XP crack in an offline environment. And don't run XP at this point, unless for experimental, or if you're a younger listener and you never used XP and you're trying to like play with it or something like that, maybe that's a reason. But really, I mean, like, look, if you're in the camp of I want to run an old OS that's not supported anymore, run Windows 7. Like I would totally understand somebody being like, screw it, I'm running Windows 7 for the rest of my life. I understand that stance. I really do. Windows 7 was a fantastic OS. Don't do it with XP. Windows 7 is just such a better thing. Speaking of better things, you probably have already forgot about the free version of Microsoft Teams that ships with every version. It used to be pinned to the taskbar. I think it's still pinned by default. I can't even remember. I haven't done a clean install of Windows in a while, but it's the other version of Teams that you don't use for work. So they're adding communities to it. Also, they're like oddly adding Designer. So there's a thing called Microsoft Designer that can use some like generative AI stuff to create images and whatnot. And so if you're inside a community, you can kind of you can pin a post and use Designer with it. They didn't really enunciate too well how Designer is integrating into like these communities. But whatever, I guess Microsoft found a way to shove some generative AI into a thing that probably doesn't need it. But I don't know if they're trying to create like a Midjourney style thing. So if you're not familiar with Midjourney, you use it in Discord, and you type /imagine. And maybe they're thinking they can do that with Designer in their Teams app and get people in there that way. Maybe that's it. I don't know. We'll see what happens. It's like, okay, you guys, you keep doing what you're doing. Speaking of things not going Microsoft's direction, they are running into some early problems in the EU. Now, this isn't related to Xbox, which most people might think, because you'd be saying, Brad, they just got EU approval on that. They absolutely did. And it might be because the EU is going after a bigger fish. That bigger fish starts with the letter A, and it's called Azure. And so Microsoft failed to settle with the CISPE ahead of the EU cloud market dominance investigation. So TLDR of this is that Microsoft used its market position to really kind of like shove Azure credits and Azure onto clients who may not either A, wanted it, or did so in a way that was not necessarily advantageous for a free and competitive market. And so Microsoft used its market position to push a product, and they consider that dominance, and they might be in some hot water here. Microsoft tried to remedy the situation, and they failed to do so prior to it going to a deeper investigation. This will take forever to actually be closed out. But the reason why I bring this up is not that you take your opinion on if Microsoft abused their market position. That's fine. Where I really want to pivot this conversation is to, my God, it feels exactly like that's what they're doing with AI. Now, somebody will write in the comments and say, Brad, but the AI, they don't own it. They don't own OpenAI. That's a touchy, kind of funny area, because at this point, Microsoft clearly has used a market dominant position to go to OpenAI. They had the cash flow right from other products, which is fine. Companies should be allowed to invest in their future. I'm not necessarily against it, but they basically bought up OpenAI without buying up OpenAI, and they let them run on their cloud, and they're using their market power to buy up all the NVIDIA GPUs and create their own AI chips and everything else. My point here is like what happened with Azure feels like it's happening again with AI, where Microsoft is literally and violently, I might add, shoving AI into everything, just like the Teams consumer thing, whatever we call that this day with the designer generative AI stuff. And so Microsoft has no qualms about doing this, and they're following the same playbook. And it makes you wonder. It's going to take a while. The wheels of justice or law turn very slowly. And I'm not saying that Microsoft should have their hands smacked. I'm not saying that that's it, but it feels like they're going down that path of being, of throwing caution to the wind and just going all at it to bring this AI everywhere. And it feels like we've been here with Microsoft, and that they are no longer scared of the regulators, or they are willing to take the smack of the regulators to establish that dominant position, which I believe is actually their tactic. They're not going to write any of this stuff down because it'll get brought up in discovery. But, 10 years from now, when AI, there's whittled down to a few players, which, let's be honest, is probably going to be Microsoft. It's probably going to be a Google. Facebook might be in there, and maybe Amazon as well. And we'll look at the landscape and say, wow, nothing really changed except this new company called OpenAI started up, and then Microsoft bought them out effectively, right? And not holistically, but effectively did. They put a can on their innovation going to other companies. And so here we are. And we will see. We will see what happens with that. Also, I consider this to be bad news as well. The Teams 2.0, which is something I was really optimistic about, is going to become the default experience later in 2023. And my goodness, they better give us the ability to switch the scroll way of, I believe it's channels. So when you're in a one-on-one conversation with somebody, the latest part of the conversation is at the bottom. When you go into a channel, the latest part of that conversation or that thread is at the top. I understand why they did this, but it really breaks my brain. And somebody will say, Brad, it'll be fine. You'll get used to it. And it's like, I don't know if I will. Just give us the option to switch the default so that I know that I'm always scrolling down to the bottom. The problem becomes you're in a chat, you jump into a channel, you scroll down, and you just scroll infinitely rather than trying to get to where you're actually going. That's the biggest issue. That's an easy fix. It doesn't even have to be a fix. Just give us a toggle and I will move on. And that should probably do it. So there you go. On to the gaming news this week, my friends. So Microsoft is being pretty quiet this week. That is not surprising, given that on June 11th, it's the Xbox Game Showcase. There's going to be tons of games. There's going to be tons of stuff. And we will wait and see, because which approach is Microsoft going to take, which we'll talk about here in the questions. There's one question this week, and I'll explain more on that in a second. I don't want to dive into it. Also coming out this week is a report from Bloomberg about what happened with Redfall. And it's the same story that we've heard quite literally at every company. Management didn't give clear direction. There was high turnover. Like, the ethos of the company has really just kind of fallen apart. More importantly, though, in which I believe it was talked about several different times before this report, Microsoft took a pretty hands-off approach to this game, to the studio, because one of their pitches is like, when we buy you, we'll let you keep your company culture. But as it turns out, that company culture really got turned over because the people behind the game of Redfall didn't want to make a multiplayer game. And actually, according to the Bloomberg report, they were secretly hoping that Microsoft was going to come in and say, hey, make this a single-player game again and do what you guys do best, which clearly is not a multiplayer title. And so here we are with the same tale as whatever has gone on with Redfall. The story has been written itself. The title, it is what it is. We will see if it can be salvaged, but it's the same story that we hear over and over again. We'll see. I suspect that Redfall might mean that Microsoft takes a little bit, maybe not like a full scale, like walk-in type takeover approach, like a rating of the studio sort of thing, but I suspect that they will be much closer to the chest with a lot of companies, especially if they get this Activision deal done, to make sure things are going on the path. Because I still don't believe the argument that senior management on the Xbox side, not Redfall or Arcane or whoever studios, I believe like Phil Spencer and his crew, somebody on that team absolutely knew that this game was not ready to go. They clearly got some sort of insider scoring. Like, right, it's not unusual for a company to be like, hey, can we get some feedback from outside parties to give us a fake review, and then you go through that process. That's not unusual in the industry. I still believe that there's no way that this game got through all that and then somebody in the senior leadership team didn't know that this game wasn't going to be great. Like that had to. And if it didn't, like that's a bigger issue in itself. It's one thing to know you've got a bad game and then you just like slap the ship button and away it goes. It's another thing to like have zero idea that the game is actually terrible. So not just terrible, but I mean just riddled with bugs on day one. So anyways, you can go read that over on Bloomberg. And chalking in their 38th approval. Keep in mind that a bunch of these countries are in the EU. South Korea's FTC has approved Microsoft's Activision acquisition. So Microsoft is all clear across the board there. Again, not that anybody thought that was going to be a hang-up, but they're still dealing with the CMA, which, by the way, the CMA was really trying to drag out this court case. They wanted like several months to prepare for this, and Microsoft saying, hey, no, you really don't, because Microsoft is obviously heavily incentivized to a couple $2 billion to try to get this thing done by June 30th, which, let's be honest, is not going to happen. However, they don't want the CMA case to drag on. They're hoping that they get through the FTC, and then the CMA comes around, gets overruled locally or whatever, and then they close the deal. So on to the questions of the week. And there's only one. I didn't actually do a thread, but Mr. PKI slipped into the DMs asking where the thread was. And because I'm recording it on a Thursday night, I didn't do a question thread. But he does have one, which is pretty cute for the upcoming events on June 11th. So Mr. PKI says, the theme is what game date announcements will we get at the upcoming game event, and what will be announced that will be delayed. So Mr. PK tying it into the June 11th Xbox showcase. What games are Microsoft going to announce? This is what I was kind of alluding to here. I suspect that, remember, there's two ways that Microsoft went about this. Last year, like all these games launching in the next 12 months. We all know how poorly that aged. I would be shocked if Microsoft did anything like that. And I honestly wonder if we're going to get two release dates. Starfield, which we already know, so maybe we're only getting one, and maybe Forza. I think that might be it. There might be some smaller titles, but I'm talking like the big ones. Maybe that's, I would be shocked if we get any release dates that are more than 6 months out, because my rule is if a company and it says a game is coming and it's more than a 6 month window, there's a better than good chance it's been delayed. There's a rich history of that. If it's beyond like 8-10 months, something like that, like they're just guessing at this point, the way the state of the industry is, which I'm not blaming any individual studio. It's tough to build video games. It's tough. And when you're trying to get those high scores, like it really comes down to polish, which polish is at the very end. If you don't have enough time to polish, you end up with a Redfall. And so I think we'll maybe only get another one. I shouldn't even say two, really just one. We'll get Forza, which should be, sometime in the fall, right? Prior to that holiday shopping season, they get Forza, they get a Starfield that gives them a pretty good narrative, some other smaller titles, something like that. And then a bunch of showcasing, like saying, hey, Avowed, I really am curious about Avowed. And so I hope we learn more about that. Anyways, that's June 11th. So you've got a whole more than a whole week. We've got to sit here and wait. I suspect that things will leak out like they always do ahead of these events. But either way, that sort of wraps it up for this week, my friends. And hopefully you had a wonderful week. I know I had a pretty decent week. I should have a good week next week. Hopefully you will too. And I'm excited about the 11th showcase. And as always, my friends, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this podcast is me.